Okay, as an operator of this machine, and you want to make sure every single day you take it out. You know, some of those guys that are part-time guys may only, you know, run a few jobs a week. You know, my company, Valley Borders, you know, it's several a day. So we got to make sure that everything is, you know, performing correctly. And me as the operator, most of the time, you know, I need to check for certain things to make sure that everything is, you know, running perfectly and well maintained. You know, every time you bring your machine out, just take a close look at it, take a little cursory check. You know, what I like to do is, you know, make sure that, you know, I'm looking inside here to make sure everything is tight. This is a, you know, a hopper bolt, we'd call that. That's going to connect your undercarriage. Sometimes, you know, over time that can come loose. You just need to make sure that that's in there. We have two other bolts on the side here that connect that. There's one here and there's one here. So those three bolts, if you take them off, you'll take that undercarriage off. And what I do suggest, maybe every week or so, when your guys, maybe on a Friday, the last job, is to actually take that off. You know, it's a simple socket wrench. Take that undercarriage off, flip it over, make sure that there's, you know, nothing under there. You can take a small mallet and make sure everything is clean, and you can easily put that back on. This one right here is what's going to connect your track and trolley to the actual hopper and the frame itself. So you need to make sure this is tight. Usually that's put on with a Loctite and things like that, but you know, things are vibrating. This machine, you know, if you're putting a lot of miles on this machine, you know, you just got to make sure things are tight and things are good. You know, take your back plate off once in a while and start it up. You know, see what's going on underneath there. I'm just gonna go ahead and start this up real quick. You know, take a look at this, make sure everything is. You can look right down in there. You can see if there's any bolts loose, if there's anything scraping. You know, your track and trolley is going to let you know if there's something going on down there. If you spill concrete in there, you're throwing it in, you get something in there, and it's dry in there, and then, you know, 2 or 3 days down the road, you've done a couple thousand feet, let's say, and you hear a little bit of squeaking in there. Well, things got to stay lubed up in there, okay? And what we suggest you do every single day is to use a little bit of form oil, form release oil. You can get them at any concrete supply house. You know, it usually comes in a 5-gallon bucket, and you can get a trigger sprayer. It's the, you know, it's the oil they would use on when they're doing flat work and things like that, so concrete's not sticking to their boards and so on. If you don't have any of that, technically Borderline will probably be offering some of that if people can't find them. But if you don't have that, usually a long time ago, I would go ahead and have a small little bottle of WD-40, a little can in my tray that I carry my tools with. And every morning before I start the first job, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spray my track and trolley underneath there with WD-40 or form oil. We have that now. And I usually just kind of spray that up in there. Now, there's, you know, a lot of moving parts down there. You want to make sure everything is lubed up and everything goes. Now, if you get a little squeak in there, doesn't mean that you have a bad bearing. It doesn't mean that there's something off. It could just mean that a little bit of concrete fell in there and got in that track, and it's got a little squeak. You spray it up every morning, and it'll keep that lubed up, and everything will last a lot longer in there. It's no different than, you know, you greasing, you know, grease zerks on your mixer and so on and so forth. There's no grease zerks on those small little bearings, so make sure that it's you know, that it's lubed up. You know, you can do the same thing here. You can spray a little bit down there. You know, try not to spray your belt or anything, but make sure everything's gone. Now, the great thing about form oil too is if your hopper's really cleaned every day, you can take that form oil and you can spray a little bit all over your hopper. And what that's going to do for you is basically when you clean up the next time, it's going to be easier to clean up because that won't stick as much. Okay, so form oil is great for just doing a little spray in there. Now, you don't want to use some common sense. You can't spray a whole bunch in there and have oil running down there, but you can sure coat it a little bit and make sure that you know, that's just going to be easier to clean. First job of the day, let's say you do 3 jobs that day, you don't have to really do that the second and third job because it's still on there. But you know, beginning of the day, that is something that as an operator, that is your responsibility that you need to do. Now, what I do is when I first start the machine, I got just on idle right now. I'm going to look at my plunger, and I'm going to make sure my plunger is moving correctly back and forth. There's no real, you know, sideways action if it's scraping or anything like that. Because if that is the case, then there might be the bolt underneath that connects that plunger could be loose, which happened to us a couple weeks ago. So you might need to tighten that up, or there might be something off underneath on your track and trolley. And so when you get down there and you have it running and you look at that, you might be able to tell that, hey, that bolt kind of came loose right there. It needs to be adjusted. We need to make sure that we have everything tight there. There's 3 or 4 different, there's 2 bolts here that you need to make sure that are, you take a look at them, say, hey, you can usually tell if they're a little loose. Take a wrench, make sure they're tight, and so on. It is your responsibility and up to you to make sure that everything is going correctly in there. Now, the speed that we go, we crank this thing up, and you're allowed to go pretty fast with this machine if your experience dictates that. That's moving pretty fast underneath there. You got a lot of vibration, you got a lot of things going on. Things can loosen up. It doesn't matter if it's brand new, it doesn't matter if it's 10 years old. Things can loosen up, so you just need to keep an eye on all that kind of stuff so you don't have a big issue come down the road with, your bolt came loose underneath there and it jammed up, and because of that, a couple bearings became shot. Now you got to take the whole thing out and you got to replace those bearings, which isn't hard, but it's something that could be prevented with just some daily maintenance and looking at those things. Now, what I want to do is make sure that my guys know, especially if they're new guys, I want to go through every single thing with them on how to clean this machine. Because typically, if I'm running the machine and I'm doing some finishing, they've brought the machine up front and they're starting to clean it. I'm not there to watch them. Okay, and it's not something that you want to deal with the next morning if the thing wasn't cleaned properly and something jammed underneath there because there's a big piece of concrete that's stuck in there. Okay, so you need to go ahead and show them the exact way to clean this at the end of every job. Now, this is a PR Sting. This is going to be easier to clean and maintain than most of the other machines because you can take the engine off, and we'll go ahead and I'll show you how to do that. But every single job, there's no reason that engine can't come off and this machine, can't be cleaned the way it's supposed to be cleaned. It is up to you as the owner or the operator to make sure that your guys have a set routine on what they do and how they clean. Okay, so to do this, essentially you're going to take the back plate off. Okay, and hopefully you can see this. There's a pin right here. This is our engine pin system. There's a pin right here. It's just a simple cotter pin. I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. Make sure you don't lose that in the grass. The handle is underneath here. Now, what I need to do is, because I moved my steering assembly over earlier, I need to make sure that I can pull that pin out. So I'm just going to slide that a little bit. And this pin will come out. All right. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, how to do this once you show them once or twice. Okay. Set that off to the side. Make sure you don't tip it over. This machine now can be cleaned. You can go ahead and take that hose and you can wash everything off under there. Now, if that's been sprayed with form oil, like you should every single day, all that stuff that may have fallen in there earlier in the job will now clean off. Really simple. Okay. You need to make sure that they take the machine and they lift it up. You're not worried about gas and oil being mixed and everything now because it's not on the machine. Okay. Now, your undercarriage. Here's your skids. What I tell my guys, and be careful with this, I go ahead and tell them, you can take a hammer, okay, a small mallet or a hammer. Things get stuck in here, okay? You got concrete that gets stuck right in those skids. I have them tap it with the hammer underneath. Not hard, but they'll get all that off dry. This is before we even started spraying anything, okay? I want all this cleaned off dry before we start spraying because it's easier. Now, what's going to happen with your plunger also is, because of the skids, you're going to have concrete that might get stuck underneath here, okay? So what I have them do, now this is really tight, see? So this is a brand new machine, it's nice and tight. Sometimes I just do a light tap on here and that will fall off dry. It's easy. Now, okay, we can look underneath, okay? I got bearings are good, everything's good. Take a close look, make sure everything's good. You can see your nuts and bolts, make sure everything's tight. Just a quick cursory look, and take a look at everything. Hey, everything's good underneath here. Now they can take the hose and they can go ahead and blast this thing from underneath. There's no excuse whatsoever not to have this thing perfectly clean every single job, okay? And if it's done quickly, I'm still working on that last part of curb, finishing that curb or talking to the homeowner. I'm not even up here yet, and this could all be done, okay? So they get all that clean, make sure it's all good, put it all back down, all right? Now, it's just essentially making sure that the engine goes back on again. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and lift the engine up. And what you have to do here is just line this up. It's pretty simple. It can only go on one way. All right, before you put the pin in, the belt has to go on. Okay, so the bottom first. It's like this. Tilt the engine forward. All right, now that belt is very tight because it's brand new. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to pull that engine down so I can get this pin in here. And you can hear how tight that belt is. Okay, sometimes if you have two guys, it's a little bit easier to get one guy to kind of pop it in from the back. And if you go ahead and, you know, I put a little grease on there once in a while, that'll slide in and out pretty easy. Okay, got it all the way to the end, and you can see the hole right here, and boom, it's on there. Now this should, perfect. Okay, you're good to go. Absolutely zero excuse not to have that thing clean every single time. You can go ahead and put this back on, put it in the trailer, you're off to the next job. You know, as far as maintenance on your engine, it's obviously very simple. You're gonna have to check the gas obviously every time. Typically 1 tank of gas, depending on how fast you go, is gonna get you several hundred feet. Okay, your oil, get in the habit. If you're an operator, check the oil every day. Just pull it, check it, put it back in. Now when you're in a rush and you're in a hurry, sometimes you don't check it for a day or two, but that's just common sense maintenance that you need to do. If you're going to change the oil, go ahead and take the engine off and just take it onto a bench and change the oil. It's that simple. Okay, so you know, it's one of those things that's totally up to you. Now, as far as tightening the belt, now these belts they're AccuLink belts, and I'll show you in a little bit how they work. This belt here will last you a better part of a decade, depending on you know, how much curb you do. They last forever. It's not your normal belt. All right. To tighten this belt, okay, all you're going to do is raise the engine. So this bolt right here with this you know, nut to secure it, basically you loosen this nut and you tighten the bolt, and it raises the engine. It raises this plate, which in turn tightens the belt. You can see how tight this is. It's about where we want it. If you see it running and that you can really see that belt vibrating, your belt's probably a little bit loose. Raise the engine, and you're going to notice too that it's got more of a punch. It's going to just slam that curb out instead of, you know, kind of soft. Okay, so that's one thing, you know, all you have to do to tighten the belt. There's no special, you know, way to with tensioners and all this other kind of stuff. This is very, very simple and very easy. Here's a suggestion from, you know, obviously a lot of guys that curb a lot. Your recoil, you know, it's going to happen eventually that rope is going to break, and it's going to break at exactly the wrong time when it's 95 degrees out and you're right in the middle of a run, and you need to get that changed as quick as possible before your concrete dries on you and you can't work it no more. What I suggest is you have another rope in your truck, in your trailer, that's ready to go. Okay, it's got a handle on it. The rope is already there. With being able to remove this engine and pull it off and take it to your truck, it should only take you a few minutes to actually put a new rope in there. A lot of guys like myself that have, you know, have had so many of these engines, and we got older ones sitting here. I have one of these whole things in my truck at all times. So if that breaks, I can pull that engine off in 15 seconds, take it over to the truck, remove the 3 bolts, put a whole new one back on, and I'm back on the machine in you know, less than 4 or 5 minutes. That is going to save you sometimes several $100s because you just didn't ruin that whole curb right there because it's too dry. Okay, that's a suggestion that we make that you might want to do, you know, just something that you know, it's going to happen at the wrong time for you, and it's not something that is really enjoyable on site. Your molds and trowels, every single job, okay, it's usually up to the operator, the person that's using these, you know, that's finishing that last part of the curb and getting them ready to, you know, put back on the truck and everything. That would be my responsibility. And usually if I have my glove on, you know, and it's dry, I can go ahead and wipe everything off and make sure everything is good. Sometimes when you throw these in together in a tray and they're banging against each other, sometimes you'll get a little nick in them. So you need to take a look real close and, you know, see if you got any nicks, see if you got anything that's going to affect your curb. But after every single job, those need to be wiped off and cleaned. Sometimes if they're getting the machine and we have the tools there, they'll go ahead and use the hose and they'll go ahead and clean them off. But that needs to be done every single time, and to make sure that those are clean for the next time. If it rains for 3 days and you never cleaned them, and now you're going to start the next job 3 days later, and these haven't been cleaned, there's going to be some choice words coming out of your mouth that obviously it's going to take some time to get those cleaned off, and sandpaper or whatever. So it's kind of a pain. So that's something you have to do every single job. It's up to the operator typically. If it's not done, you really can't blame it on anybody else, because you're the last one to use it, and it's your responsibility. So that's something that you have to do. All right, I went ahead and took this belt off real quick here. I'm going to show you. It's called an AccuLink belt. Okay, these are 1 inch lengths, so you can lengthen them, you can shorten them, and they're not made out of rubber like a normal belt would be, and they're just almost indestructible. The thing is, when you get a brand new machine, we typically will run this machine for an hour and a half, 2 hours outside, and we'll just let it run at full blast to make sure that we can get this to stretch a little bit, because after a couple thousand feet, these will stretch slightly. We make sure that they're pretty tight when you get them, but sometimes they'll start to loosen up because they're just stretching. When it starts to stretch and you start to raise this, if you raised this a good inch and a half to get that to be nice and tight in there, once you get it up that far, you can go ahead and lower it back down, take the belt off, and go ahead and remove a link, and then you'll be set for basically the life of the machine almost, because these are just indestructible. So essentially, you're going to take these tabs right here, turn the tab on the next one, and you can remove this little link right here and go ahead and reattach the tabs on the next one. It's the same thing if you want to lengthen it. Let's say you're going to put a different pulley on this or whatever, and you want it longer. We just add 1 or 2 depending on how long you want it. Again, these are just they're really, really good belts, and that's we buy them by the foot, and that's what we use. So it's not the length of the belt, it's how many links there are in them that we really look at. Okay, essentially, if you have some downtime, for sure once or twice a season, and for sure after the season, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and take that track and trolley system out of the machine, and you want to go ahead and make sure all the bearings and everything's lined up and everything is perfect. Let's say if you got a few rainstorms coming through and you got some downtime, it's very easy to actually take that whole system out and put it back in. What you're going to do is these 2 bolts, hopefully you can see this bolt right here, this bolt right here, you take those off and you leave this cross piece attached to the gearbox itself. All right, and then you go ahead and you take the main bolt out here in front. Now, to get that whole thing out of there, you're gonna have to take the plunger off first. So what you do is go ahead and tip it up. There's a bolt that connects the plunger to the post. You just loosen that, and that plunger will slide off. It's very, very simple. But this plunger needs to come off first before you take the track and trolley system out. So once that's gone, go ahead and remove that bolt, the 2 bolts in the back. This is much, much easier if you take the whole engine off and you actually flip it up, or actually tip the whole machine upside down. Okay, by taking the engine off, this makes it a lot easier. So that whole system will come out of there. Essentially you're gonna have to take the engine off anyway, because you need the belt off there. Okay, so that engine needs to come off anyway, because the belt attaches that to the bottom. But so you can take that whole thing off. Now this is what it's going to look like. Here's your whole track and trolley system. So as far as changing bearings, and these bearings, just cost a few bucks a piece. You can get 8 bearings for 30 bucks or 35 bucks. They're not expensive. And what a lot of other manufacturers are telling you to stay away from this type of system, because all you're doing is changing bearings every week. That is so far from the truth. Last time I changed the bearing, I know it was more than a year ago. So that's 50, 60,000 feet. So that's not an issue. But even if you had to change one, I could get this out in less than 5 minutes, and it could be sitting on a table just like this. If this bearing was broken right here for some reason, okay, all I need to do is get a 3/4 inch wrench on both sides, unscrew that, put a new one in, and it's that simple. Okay, you can easily check every one of these to make sure that they're all good. It's not a problem, not an issue. And what you want to do is make sure that those things, your arms, are directly parallel to each other. Everything is all lined up, because if this arm is a little bit farther forward than this arm, it's going to push longer, and it's gonna wobble in there, and you're gonna get more wear. Might get some squeaking, might get some, you know, things going on in there. So that's one of the things you have to check underneath before you start each job. Let's make sure that everything is lined up. You can see if things are loose. That is totally up to the operator to make sure everything is well maintained. You have screws and a key that will connect your arms that come off the gearbox, just like this. There's 2 of them right here with a keyway in it. All right, these are red hot. Okay, so they got Loctite on them. But again, with all the vibration and all the movement, all those things, you need to make sure that those are on there and those are tight. If that loosens up, these come out and so on, this will slide on the shaft and this will start scraping on the side of the frame, and you'll know it right away. Okay, so these are all things that you need to maintain and you need to take a look at. There's 4 bearings on each side. Very, very easy to replace if you have one go bad, which if you have everything lubed up, form oil, you could go years without having to change a bearing, and you know, you're going to get thousands and thousands of feet out of this. All right, everybody, hope you guys enjoyed watching these 3 videos. Hopefully they helped you. For those of you that are buying a brand new machine, you know, make sure you watch the maintenance video and to make sure that everything is well maintained and everything is done correctly. These machines will last for a long time and will make you a lot of money. Thanks, guys.